Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. First thing, I feel very privileged to come here and join you at this kind of pivotal moment in the organisation by the sound of it. And I hope to be able to contribute. I'm here as an outsider, really, a view from elsewhere, and as a generalist. I was a GP for 30 years, and I became known in the practice as the doctor that was interested in mental health. And in fact, I met James and Heward on at a series of meetings in London about how to deal with IAP, basically, more or less what it was about. So I was really motivated enough to come backwards to London lots of times and engage with that. I also see my job as to take you out of your comfort zones and actually be provocative and look at what's happening here and what's happening in the wider world in a way that is hopefully for most of you unfamiliar, but we'll see. Some of you may know quite a lot of what I'm about to talk about already, particularly if you're a beekeeper. We've heard talk about ants. Actually, ants and bees are quite similar in the ways that I'm going to talk about. So we'll be hearing quite a lot about insect colonies. Okay. Now, first of all, though, I want to set you a little exercise. Again, is to sort of change the modality that we're working in. And I'd like you should all have access to a piece of paper and a pencil. And I want you to spend 2 minutes, and I'm going to be strict about the time, making a drawing on a piece of paper that addresses this statement. Draw the NHS in the state you see it today. Do a drawing that reflects something about the NHS as you see it today. Now, whether or not you work in the NHS, we all have a commitment to the NHS as patients, if nothing else. So, some marks on the paper, whatever you like. Angry, tender, whatever. 2 minutes. About 15 seconds left. No one's going to judge your artwork, don't worry. Maybe you'd like them to, but you'll be disappointed then. Okay, thank you very much. That's the 2 minutes up. Now, what I'd like you to do is put yourself together in groups of 4, and it happens that there are 20 people here, apart from me. Isn't that brilliant? So, would you like to join a group? Yes, Alex,
Not particularly.
not particularly.
I'm being honest.
Okay, so one of the groups will be... No, another therapist, okay. That's great. So, you've got 4 here. I don't know whether you want to just pull the chairs around. Try not to jog the... Yeah, come on. And then I want you to, in turn, each of you in the group to explain to the others, quietly so you don't disturb one another, explain to the others what your drawing means. And then at the end, then you have 2 minutes each. So I want one of you to explain, and then another to explain, and another. So everyone gets listened to. And then I'll be asking each group to come up with a main thing that you want to say, and I'll write it down. So we'll get a list of things, what you think about the NHS.
Could you say that each person is going to have
Each person gets a couple of minutes, so you have 2 minutes each to explain your thoughts. If it's quicker than that, fine. You don't have to stay 10 minutes. But it's meant to be kind of quite quick.
Limited number of people in the service,
I sort of had the sense that the government policies coming down, and that was very definite, so I drew some definite. And this was like services that it's not just that they weren't useful for creation, but that they were fragmented and disjointed and, like struggling. And then I had this sense that, particularly whistleblowers, kind of get rid of them, if you have anything to say, just get them out. And then there were the innovators, and I was going to put them out there, and I said, oh, well, there are people really innovators, and there was kind of this very definite, and then there was somebody's going to get rid of them, somebody's going to step from it, so I drew this drawing, I don't know, things that happen in the States, like somebody comes into a campus and shoots people, and it's like they have a grievance about the NHS, and they have something, and people end up very angry, and they end up in a situation where, they do something awful. And this is all about the sort of awfulness of being innovative and creative in the NHS. So sorry.
I'll be positive about that. Okay. This is the umbrella. Time, to you, crawl under the shelter and accommodate you. Unfortunately, these are cracks and creaks and broken bits and drips coming in, and the umbrella is seriously flawed. We're all different and all the same.
Like everybody has a different take on it, and together is the
I love the NHS. Well, that's why
my class is supposed to be a wonderful idea in the school. Keeping people, but it's crumbling.
But this is
If they don't kill you or starve
it's very helpful, but the original goodness is still there.
in the hearts of some of the people that work.
No, in the provision, they go ill, and I pray in last week, and it's fantastic. Yeah, but scan you. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that's and there are some things that structurally far away. I agree. Nevertheless,
So what are we supposed to be feeding them? Do we all agree? A good vision. A good vision. That's right. All crumbling.
It's become very bureaucratic. Policy and those pushed out the innovation.
Well, exactly. I mean, ticks kill.
And the government can say it but they're there to pursue it rhythmically.
I mean, if you think of it, like I used to live in Mr. Greenwich, what's happening in the hospital? Like the hospital is functioning and doing okay. I mean, that to me is the maddest thing. Yes.
So really what you're saying is that you really make trouble.
Yeah, like, you know, just beggars belief. And you think about the whole area, and I mean, I know that region quite well, so people have to sort of go to Woolwich, and you might be way up near London Bridge or something. And it's interesting, because I was just thinking about the whole whistleblower stuff, because if somebody, you know, there are a lot more people in there in a smaller way, but somebody who was actually as powerful as my recently was so frightened. I mean, what about all the other people who were somewhere, you know, in the hierarchy down below?
And all of that.
Well, it crushes people. It drains the crushes the ants.
So that makes
Medical schools are going
One
the
or
same
two
way.
things that you want to say to me.
One or two.
Many different.
It was a good vision. Let's deliver some of things.
We'll be ready to come up with one or two.
That's a very positive spin.
I think it still does, but it's crumbling the bureaucracy.
the damage being done now is not again.
Well, it's a real
Most of that, it's getting to be towards, you can't see.
You can't close down a computer to detonate experience and expect to regenerate that in a couple of years when policy changes. It's gone through.
But there's another adverse out in medical schools, teacher staff and the teacher training, so the training sessions are depleted. Being paid.
That place is the extent of the damage I knew this might be say, let's get the way of disaffection let's do just that, but we don't really extend it down to well happening. We may well very well but whether we will then have be able to create a government structure that can deal with that.
Okay, so that's the time up now.
I'm prepared.
I'd like each group to be ready to give me one or two things I can write on.
Wonderful vision.
and each the big red
Because the arts, I mean, there are
And you know, issue was development in a way.
but that's I had
An increasing number of Muslims who are suppressed.
has been retired because he makes them have there to give them all the resources.
Yeah, but then individuals get blamed. Exactly. Wider analysis.
Okay, now we're going to move on
Yeah,
to the next
that's
thing.
Even within
I've got a little gone now, but will I need it? I'll get it out. Yeah, I know. It's hard, isn't it? Now, as a group, I think the group of three probably thinks
So that's all. It'll come to you.
It's
okay.
I love
You were at
it.
Trinity, you had a bit longer.
I wish it was still.
Would you like to tell me one or two things about the NHS? We're moving on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
What would you like to put on my list?
Oh, that word. Just
Okay,
makes my blood boil.
the one that I want to say about is the perceived dichotomy between the real people.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Are you starting?
Yeah, we're starting.
The perceived dichotomy between the real people who work in the NHS, who I drew as, just smiley faced people,
Yeah.
who mostly, obviously, really care about what they're doing and so on.
Yeah.
And then how that's presented in the media as being doom and gloom and awful and so on.
Right,
So obviously there's many more aspects to that, but that's a particular one.
a
Between
kind
the
of
people and the media.
some sort of chasm between the people who work in the NHS, who are caring and want to do a good job, and
And how it's
the hierarchy
portrayed by
above them,
the media, how the media portrays it as all doom and gloom.
particularly the media.
Yeah,
Caring's
I know
not-
we could make it much broader than that, but that was the particular point.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll go get one thing from each group and then we'll see if there's any other crying ones. Would you like to go next?
One thing, I guess chaos, disintegration and lack of connection, if you can call that one thing,
Yeah.
was something which we all picked up on. And funnily enough, can I put another one? Because the other thing which I think is a little bit different but quite interesting and fits with Fiona's group, the concept that the NHS actually has doesn't have a proper connection with the world in terms of the cultural differences in models of care, and that contributing to the disintegration, the lack of connection. Is that a fair representation?
Different models of care don't seem to be joined
Connected and joined up.
Yeah.
Is that
Models of-
fair representation? And particularly that we have a lot of people from other cultures working in the NHS and they have different concepts of care. I think that's...
Particularly the do you mean cultural in the ethnic sense? Or some of that as well, actually.
Yes.
But mainly professional culture.
Professional culture and ethnic
And
sense.
okay. Now, would you like to tell me what you think?
You our drawing, because I think that's really graphic and says...
Your drawing.
Our drawing.
Your drawing.
Well, I mean, the group own this drawing now, do they? No? Not quite.
You liked it? That's what they do.
We're happy
One of
to
us
try to
had
go
a very
forward,
different
yes.
view, but there's a
They are
general
all
consensus.
psychotherapists.
Absolutely. That we see the NHS as a lumbering monster that's overriding, and psychotherapy is the small shivering bird that has lost its tweet, its voice,
All right.
its response to.
So a great monster. Overwhelming monster.
Excluding kind of.
But that's collapsing as well, and
It's
that,
collapsing as well.
All right. So
I-
a sick monster.
I
Yes.
dissent completely from that
Okay, hang on.
So it's not group.
Yes.
Sick monster. Psychotherapists cowering in the corner. Just really good.
I think that is the ruling fantasy of UKCP.
The ruling fantasy of UKCP.
That somehow there is this giant monster and we're tiny, beleaguered, but really kindly, nice people who need a lot of protection
Yes.
and care because
Yeah.
we're just embryonic.
Maiden in distress.
Yeah, but even a child in need of nurturing.
That's not what the group thought at all.
It's not what
No,
Absolutely not.
So a minority view.
that would be a minority view.
Yes.
That
It would be a
there
very
is something
minority.
about that picture that captures something.
So you identify with the picture, it's just the way you interpret it.
I would interpret it very differently.
We'll
Shadow
talk
is
about
projected,
interpretation in a
you're
minute.
saying.
I would say it's a fantasy rather than a reality.
Okay.
But that is my view.
You can
Yeah,
see
no,
why it's taken us 20 years to get to where we are.
Yeah, I realise I'm pushing you to the extremes here. Now we've had that. Now, would you like? Yeah. Divine? Is that right?
Yes.
One of the things that we did a bit of a thematic analysis of all the diagrams and came up with the concept of struggling.
Struggling. Okay.
And not being helped.
Who's struggling?
The NHS?
The NHS or people in the NHS?
People who deliver services mainly, isn't it?
People who deliver services.
Is that
So
right?
it's the people who are working in it that are struggling.
And it's not helped, it's not being helped, which is actually quite an important difference.
Okay.
And it's not just the staff. I'm sorry, I don't think you've captured it at all.
Right.
It was struggling and not being helped. It's the beingness of it.
So the staff, shall I cross the staff off?
For me, it was more than just about the staff. It was about the whole. When we were talking and looking across our drawings, it felt like it was more than just the people working in the NHS, but actually all of
And
us.
the patients,
struggle-
everyone
struggle-
who's
yeah,
involved.
all that's engaged, all
So
the
it's
people
plus,
engaged.
not crossed out.
Yeah, it's a plus.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
We were quite keen to capture the idea that it was a wonderful vision that does
Yes.
still work
Yes.
quite well at times, but that the damage that's being done through bureaucracy and funding feels irreparable, and the irreparable was
So-
an important word.
A sort of golden vision.
Yeah,
That
and
broken golden vision.
Which still also
it
works.
still also delivers.
Yes.
And
The damage feels irreparable.
it feels so. It's not a. It's an ailing vision that doesn't look like it's going to get better any day soon. Right. Broken golden vision. Weary, irreparable.
Irreparable cuts, I would say, not the vision.
And you mentioned bureaucracy
And
and
funding.
funding, didn't you?
Yeah.
And those are the bogeymen.
And we'd also like the suppression of whistleblowers to be noted on your list.
Yeah.
That would be a. That's a, you're
A
allowed
separate
to
point.
if the second one is really, really pressing.
It is.
It is.
Otherwise we'll run out of pig. So whistleblowers.
Suppression of.
Suppression of whistleblowers. So you think they should be suppressed or they shouldn't be suppressed?
No, they should
No,
be.
I needn't ask that. Right.
Well, one man's resentment about his redundancy payment is another man's whistleblowing. It's a bit tricky, isn't it?
Very.
It's tricky. Yeah, he took the money, didn't he?
He did take the money, yeah, and signed the contract as well.
It's also about the suppression of innovation, because I mean there's a bit of
Yes. I mean, that goes with the bureaucracy, doesn't it? But I think innovation, does anyone else identify with this suppression of innovation thing?
I think there's a lot of innovation, it's just not able, you can't provide it to everyone, and that's where it becomes difficult, because there's more innovation in the NHS than probably any other health system in the world.
Yeah.
But it can't be rolled out and it can't be given to everyone.
Is that because it's expensive innovation? So think about cancer drugs and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, but it's the day-to-day kind of suppression of,
Yeah.
you know, creative ideas, you know, that it's hard to contain it within that structure, so it's easier to have the tick boxes that we were talking about.
So non-available innovation, there's somehow a potential for innovation,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, money, cries in the wilderness, whatever, it's not getting to the people.
Creativity is crushed.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I like that, creativity's crushed.
Well, because
But
it's
it's
always a
sporadic.
top-down innovation, isn't it? Which is generalised, it's imposed. It's an innovation that is thought up by bureaucrats
Yeah.
that has to be applied across the board, rather than organic innovation that comes from the grassroots,
Okay.
bottom up.
So there's something about top-down
Yeah.
And
kind of
political,
squashing things.
yeah, and political ideology, which is actually about destroying the NHS and
Yeah.
the welfare state.
Yes, yes.
Now we'll have
I
to stop
thought-
there
I-
because we're at the
there's-
bottom of the paper.
But just it's a kind of personal thing, but it's partly about it being, I don't know, a zero-sum game. I had superb experience in an oncology, caring, efficient, state-of-the-art, brilliant. I met a colleague yesterday, day before yesterday, who had been pushed out of his job because he'd been complaining about how all the resources of St James Hospital were being drained into this unit,
Yes.
which was operating creatively, superbly,
Yeah.
caringly, and it was starving the other part. So there is excellence, but there isn't the scope for everything to be excellent. It's a real life thing, apart from anything else. But the decisions about what gets supported is what is hitting us, because psychotherapy is not glamorous in the NHS.
So what are the factors that make some things supported and some things not supported? Glamour is one.
That
Very
was one
important.
I think what Annie was saying makes sense to me as well. It's that idea of that it's not that there isn't innovation, there can be claims for innovation, but it's where the innovation is happening and then what's done with it at the point where it's being taken through the service itself, so that it moves from being an innovative bit of thinking to actually being a boxed bit of thinking. Because there isn't. So one of the elements to me seems to be if I think of people I'm supervising who work in the NHS, one of the things is the lack of the ability to change the walls of those boxes enough
So there's a
to meet
boxing
their local
process
needs. So
going
there's something about, it might be a new idea, but how it actually gets implemented.
on. Yes.
But I remember a complaint 50 years ago almost, that what it's about is shroud waving, as they called it. And the people who can say, people will die tomorrow unless I get money,
Yes.
get the money. And we're not killing enough of our patients, and encouraging them to suicide. We've got data, we could use it, but we fail.
Last one, Heward. The last word.
I think we're talking as if there's the perfect golden vision, and we ourselves have nothing to do with the chaos. And I do think we have a profound deal to do with the chaos. Many times run an institution exercise which you can run with as little as 10 people, and in 2 hours we managed to create as much chaos as there is in the NHS in 50 years. People create chaos, not just governments and not just bureaucracies. We create bureaucracies and we create governments.
Okay, well that's very well made, because it takes me on to the next bit, really, in a way. And I did this exercise at home. I thought, well, what will I put? And I put some of them, I use different words, but very similar things to the ones you've come up. Part of the reason for asking you to do this is because instead of looking at your own organisation, you're looking from where you are at another organisation. So it takes you out of this mode that you were in just now. And then I wrote down what I thought the problems with society were. Okay, so an even bigger organisation, if you like. And I came up with very similar things. I came up with, they were different in some ways in the sense that the context was different. But this question of people's voices not being heard, of caring people not being recognised, beavering away quietly in communities. The odd one will get an MBE or something, but it's pretty unusual. Lots of great work goes on in communities that is not recognised. And a sense of society not being joined up. Well, probably most people wouldn't want society to be joined up, would they? Somehow we want the NHS to be joined up, though, which is quite interesting. We'll come back to that. A sick monster. I think some aspects of society are kind of rather monstrous, aren't they? The military-industrial complex, as it used to be called, for instance. So, I think at any rate, it's up for you to make up your own mind whether, to some extent, what we see here is a reflection of what goes on in society, of the way we organise our social arrangements, and also what goes on here is a function of human nature and how human beings behave and how tribal we are. Okay, so I'll leave that up for a minute. These similarities in complexity language, and I'll come back to complexity in a minute because it's key to this event, this session. These similarities between patterns within the psychotherapy world, within the NHS, within society, are called fractals. And those fractal patterns, some of you are nodding, so that's really good. Fractal patterns are very interesting because they often, at first glance, don't look like they're similar. But the more you look at them, the more you tend to see similarities between fractal patterns, and there's a reason for that. Now, the other influence which has been touched on here by quite a few of you is funding, is money. And that means economics, basically. The more I think about the way society functions, the way our social arrangements function, the more convinced I become, at any rate, that the way the economy is organised is kind of central to what we experience. A lot of what we experience is to do with us being human beings and the nature of our species, and the fact that we're social creatures and that we're very innovative and we have free will, which is probably our biggest problem, and we're greedy and jealous and all those things. The economy, I think, the more I think about healthcare and about the NHS and about the way communities work, the more I have been drawn into reading about economics, because it encapsulates, in many ways, it seems to underlie a lot of the problems that we've got. And I want to introduce you to the fable of the bees. I expect Heward knows about the fable of the bees, maybe not.
Bernard de Vanderbilt.
Exactly, Bernard Vanderbilt, 1705. And there's Bernard Vanderbilt. It just says 1705. He wrote a poem. It was first published in 1705, and it was called The Fable of the Bees and subtitled Private Vices, Public Benefits. And it was described also as a satirical poem. Now, just to put you in context a bit, Bernard Vanderbilt was a Dutch-born physician, actually. He was a doctor and a philosopher, political economist and satirist. And this poem that he published caused a huge stir in society. It was very big at the time. And he re-edited it and republished it in various forms over quite a few years, and he became famous for it. At the time, at the beginning of the 18th century, Queen Anne was on the throne. England had fairly recently become a constitutional democracy, so there was Parliament, but the Queen or the monarch remained a very significant had a very significant role. And what I read about Queen Anne is that she was a dull woman whose chief pleasures were playing cards and drinking tea. So she didn't have her eye on the ball. Now, that's an important bit of background. Another important bit of background is that she was surrounded by very clever people. It was the time when Christopher Wren was most active, the architect of St Paul's Cathedral, and many other churches in London and elsewhere. And Sir Isaac Newton, who was perhaps the godfather and grandfather and father of the natural sciences. He was a researcher and mathematician and also a theologian, interestingly enough. Anyway, she was surrounded by these very powerful and very clever people. And also the Anglican Church at the time had finally won the battle against the Roman Catholic Church to have charge of the state and to become the official religion, and it's remained so ever since. But that had only just happened, and the Anglican Church was rather inclined to flex its muscles. And preaching atheism was a capital offence. So by publishing this poem, Mandeville was risking execution. He got away with it because of being very clever with satire, and it's all allegorical. But it doesn't take much of a reader of metaphors to see that the character in one of the key characters in the Fable of the Bees, the Queen of the Hive, is actually modelled on Queen Anne. Okay, so what is this story that he wrote? In a nutshell, he described a hive which was industrious, like hives are. If you look at a hive or a bee's nest, you see lots and lots of activity. And they produce honey, and the bees are going out and coming back and going out and coming back. And it seems to work really well. And his interpretation of this at the time was the Queen was in there in charge, and she set the top-down regulations, like we've just been talking about in the NHS and society. And the people, because she was actually didn't have her eye on the ball, the people did their own thing. And that's why it says private vices, public benefits. His thesis was that you, in order to produce a productive, energetic organisation, you needed vices. You needed to not obey the rules. You needed to be having a battle, which was very interesting to hear what Hugh had said about modality wars actually giving UKCP energy. And this was very much Mandeville's thesis. Okay. I've got some quotes here which I won't read out because we don't have time. But basically I've said, one thing he said, for instance, was that virtue was detrimental to the state. When he was challenged on that, he would just say, I'm being ironic. He got away with it.
He was a contemporary of Swift, after all.
Oh, contemporary of Swift, yes. So that's right. Gulliver's Travels, isn't it?
And The Tale of a Tub, and A Modest Proposal for the People of Ireland.
Yes, well, we all know what happened after that, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, now, what you might say is that Mandeville was the founder of what became neoclassical economics. You think, God, why is this man talking to me about economics and psychotherapist? Bear with me. You don't try and write all this down, and I can give you a digital version of some of this afterwards. But basically there was a sequence of very important economists, and they weren't always called economists, they were moral philosophers and so on, that ended up with Milton Friedman in the 1960s, who was really the father of monetarism and the father of a kind of economics which is laissez-faire, leave it to the market, which is what we've got now. Rightly or wrongly. It is... No?
We don't have laissez-faire capitalism.
No, we don't. You're quite right. We don't. We don't. Not quite. Because I don't think the British people would put up with it. But
because we're rabid communists, surely you understand.
The NHS isn't a free market economy, it's a highly managed economy.
it is a highly managed economy. I suppose what I'm saying, I was going too far. We have in the background a thread, more than a thread, a kind of pressure towards the market and obeying the market.
Yes.
And the market is certainly powerful.
And it is the ideology of this government.
Yeah, we're in danger of getting into a political argument here.
The
'Cause James is
Republicans in
possibly-
America would consider this government socialist.
Yes.
No,
So
no.
what we look like depends where you're sitting politically, doesn't it? If you're sitting in a very left-wing sort of place, this government will look extreme monetarist. Friedrich von Hayek is that one. No, so you're quite, James and Heward are quite right to pull me up on that because I'm being a bit theatrical about that, aren't I, for the sake of the story. And for some people would like our economy and therefore our society to be more regulated than it is, and other people would like it to be less regulated than it is. And I suppose it flips-flops backwards and forwards in the middle, isn't it? Is that a fair... I'll move on. Because I don't want to get bogged down with politics in particular. But it seems to me, from within the NHS, and speaking from relatively left-wing position, I'm not a communist by any means, but I'm very preoccupied by the greater good, at any rate. Whether that puts me on the left of politics or not, I suspect it does. It seems to me that the world that we have, that is typified in your answers about the NHS, is really quite fragmented. It attempts to be unified and joined up, but the other message you were giving me is that it's not actually joined up in lots of ways. So the world is fragmented. I've put here, powered by science and greed. It's not only powered by science and greed, of course, but
Also
science is
powered
very
by
powerful,
fear.
greed is very powerful,
And fear is very powerful.
and fear. Because
Use
if
of fear is a big tool.
it is, and you see people who are fearful, don't you? As I did as a GP, absolutely. Because fearful people are easier to control, aren't
It's also powered by ideology.
they? Yeah. Yes,
I mean, this government has had an agenda, hasn't it?
it has.
It's also,
And
You go on.
well, that's what's so
Right.
destructive to me.
So
They're not interested in funding the NHS and
no.
helping people.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
I agree with that, and I would add that it's also powered by all sorts of prejudices and biases based on a hierarchical structure that people need the structure to have the power that they want to hold on to.
Yes. Yeah. So, but I mean, in a way, that's a feature of human beings, isn't it? Human beings seek power. They seek powerful position over other human beings.
And it's racist and it's sexist and it's
Yes, it's the unawareness of their underlying assumptions. I don't think the agenda's fine, because you can argue with that, but the things they know are true in their bones because of the way they've grown up.
Yes.
And the society, the small bit of society they've grown up in, that they aren't aware are assumptions.
Yeah.
That's the racism, all of these things.
Well,
that are
Mandeville, Mandeville felt that you shouldn't educate the poor because it only made them expect more. Which is quite a, I mean, you not
Yeah,
perhaps
it's
out loud so much, but
satisfied.
you do hear that view put forward in sorts of ways now.
Like education for women, really.
Yeah, it is a bit like that.
Under the whole heading of entitlement
Yes.
nowadays.
So there is an entitlement and an elitism, isn't it, at the moment? It looks different as the years go by, but it's there.
Can I ask, is the Hayek, the road to serfdom, Hayek?
Yes, road to serfdom.
Then I guess it's in
The interesting thing, though, for me about Mandeville is that he got the beehive wrong. That it's not how beehives work. They didn't know that at the time. The queen in a beehive, her only job is to lay eggs and look big and impressive, so that she's attractive to the drones, I imagine, smells like. And in a beehive, in fact, no one is in charge. This extraordinarily industrious, energetic, creative, productive colony has no one in charge. It has no management, therefore. And yet it not only functions, I mean, it actually creates the nest, which is quite an intricate process. So it's possible for creatures who have no idea about the bigger picture of what they're doing, they don't really have an idea of what they are, of what's going on in the rest of the hive. They only know how to interact with the people next to them, the bees next to them. And even less do they know about their role in the ecology of the environment that they're in, their vital role in pollinating crops. So it is possible, and what I want to try and get at is how it is to use complexity theory, which there isn't time to go into all the details of, but to use the ideas around complexity theory to understand about how a group of people who don't have a blueprint or a big picture, so in other words, we're transferring this to human beings, how do you organise an organisation so that the organisation can be productive, energetic, and vibrant without having anyone telling it what to do. Now, it is actually possible. And I'm not saying to you that your regulatory function can be done like that. It can't. Because human beings, unlike bees, we have free will, so that we don't operate entirely on instincts. And therefore, we have to think, we have to use our big brains to think about how to do things. But if we do that thinking along the lines that bees use, then we could actually organise things differently. Okay.
Can I just say, there is one problem with bees though, isn't it? Because they're dying off.
Exactly.
And the reason they're dying off is because they have no concept of the contextual, ecological things that are happening, which are actually affecting them.
That's quite right. And that's got to do with sensitivity to the environment. And it's a really important point, actually, because part of this process that bees use in order to thrive, and it's not just bees, I've just used bees as an example, the whole of nature works like this. Everything in nature, with the possible exception of human beings, what we do up to a point, we hear it.
The difference with humans is they have an imposed will.
We do. That is the problem.
Left to our free will, we might survive better. Is that the point you're making?
Sorry,
left to our own free will, that we might actually survive in a better way. That if we take out the state institutionalisation,
it's not as simple as that. In very broad terms, yes, but it's not as simple as that.
Rousseau would say so. Hobbes might not.
No, I mean that. Anything you say in this kind of context is there's going to be somebody who says something different.
I hear you saying the opposite, which is that it's consciousness and free will and reflexivity and all the things we pride ourselves on which actually have created the problems. The bees were doing very well for 60 million years until we came along and created something which doesn't run like clockwork, where the invisible hand no longer works, to quote Adam Smith.
Yes.
And because we now have developed ways, because we're human, of interfering with the invisible hand, and we have no idea how to manage our own interference processes. The only problem with people and agreement is that it's people.
That is true, and it was on the tip of my tongue to say that, but actually natural systems come and go anyway, even if it, and we're a passing fashion, aren't we, really? If you look at geological time, millions of species have appeared and disappeared. But in the shorter time that we can think about, yes, our influence is having a major effect on the environment. Okay, now we're getting, James is quite right. I want to talk about how you can use these ideas to
Too much
change
reflexivity here.
Yes, there is. Fascinating group to talk with. Okay, now where have you got to? Clever people in the United States mainly, I think, have used the way bees work to create gizmos. For instance, as you might imagine, the military researchers have got hold of this and designed military robots that operate like forager bees. And they've been brilliantly successful. They've also been used in airports for directing aircraft around an airport and finding a free hangar. They do it like forager bees do, and it works. So I'm not so much interested in those techie things. I'm interested in using the essence of what bees do to help communities to be more thriving, to help organisations like the UKCP to see its way forward. And I believe there is a real potential. And I'm working in a small town called Keynsham between Bath and Bristol to use these ideas to transform the town into a more vibrant and healthy place. And I've written down here some of the things that you need to do in order to do this. And it's kind of unfamiliar territory to most of you, and it was certainly unfamiliar to me when I first started. But you have to think global and act local. So we're thinking global now. We're thinking about, the whole of the economy and how that works, about how bees work. What big ideas can we have that are exciting, that enable us to cut through where we are? And I think these have the potential for doing that. So you think global and then you act local. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about things like this. What I do actually in the community is mostly ringing people up, organising meetings, designing a logo, putting little bits in the local newspaper. It's the sorts of things that anyone involved in community work does. Or, for that matter, organising the UKCP. It's kind of organisational type of things. Define boundaries of the system. Now, you've been talking about boundaries this morning, in effect. There are actually two sorts of boundaries here. There are the geographical boundaries that you were talking about. How do you help areas where, it's England, Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland? Yeah, it's a big area, isn't it? And although there are lots of psychotherapists in any one area, there are actually relatively few. How can you use these ideas to make things better for the few who happen to be in the outer reaches? Aberdeen is mentioned, wasn't it? So there are boundaries to the system and how you can think about that. We've drawn our boundary around the town. It's a natural geographical boundary. It's divided down the middle by a river and it's rich one side, poor the other. And they don't like to talk to one another. These are, a few hundred yards. But I mean, that's familiar, isn't it? It's how human beings are. We can use these ideas to draw those two halves together by drawing a boundary round Keynsham. The risk of drawing a boundary geographically, or even a virtual boundary, which I'll come to in a minute, is tribalism, which is another common human characteristic, which has its values, but it has its disadvantages as well, and I guess these modality wars are a version of tribalism. And so we have talked about geographical boundaries, and you can use technology for that. I mean, there isn't time to go into how you could do this, but there are lots of ways of dealing with that. Once you've got a vision of what you need to do, in order to enable those people to work more effectively, like bees do in a hive. It's 12 o'clock. Can I have a few more minutes? Okay, so the virtual boundaries. Now, the other sort of, we talked about geographical boundaries. The other sort of boundary is a type of virtual boundary that has to do with common interests, which doesn't have to be confined to geography. Now, for instance, you could draw your boundary, of UKCP round a certain group of psychotherapeutic approaches, which tends to mostly exclude psychologists and what they do, perhaps not entirely. When you're thinking about how to make your hive, your colony thrive, you could decide to throw your boundary a bit wider than where it is now and draw it round a group that has a common high-level purpose. We were talking about high-level purposes before. The higher you go, the more people you draw in. So you could say, and I think you do to some extent, I think, in UKCP, from what the little I know, embrace the idea of mental health and the mental health and well-being of the population. It's there. You could say, okay, what can we say about, and you were almost doing it actually earlier on, what can we say about the mental health and well-being of the population? Can we make a contribution there at that level? Which would mean talking about what public health departments do to promote mental well-being. What the economy is doing, which we've already heard about, to damage mental well-being. You could draw it even wider, which may be too wide, to include physical well-being. So at this very high level, there isn't actually a lot of difference between physical well-being and mental well-being. They merge together. So where do you draw your boundary? You draw it where you can define an overall purpose. The bees are successful because their purpose is to make the colony thrive. That's what they do. It's very clear. Everything is directed towards that. And all the other things they achieve around are offshoots from that, which they don't know about anyway. So you need a defined common purpose that you can really all agree with. And my guess is that it needs to go a bit wider, because you can then contribute to the struggles that the psychologists have, that the psychiatrists have. The College of, the Council of Osteopaths, General Council of Osteopaths, is currently doing something a little bit like that. They have what they call a development agenda, where they're bringing together a number of probably potential warriors in the modality fights that go on within osteopathy to define a common direction forward. They're doing that, and they're just doing it now, so it's a new thing. Improve connectivity. Now, another reason why beehives are so successful is because they communicate intensively with one another. But those communications are very, very local. So in a geographical area you can actually meet, unless it's a very widely dispersed area. Face-to-face meeting is much better. Now we have technology to overcome the limitations of face-to-face meetings, so you don't have to travel so much all the time. It's never as good. But group conference, Skype video conferences are really good, actually. They're an inadequate substitute, but they are a substitute. So improving connectivity inside and out, you have to connect with your environment so you can respond to what's going on in the environment. Hewitt quite rightly pointed out that we are damaging our environment. Part of the reason we're doing that is because human beings have drawn their boundary around what they do very tightly to themselves. They're not feeling part of nature. So you can take these ideas at whatever level you want. And perhaps the most complicated and tricky of all is what complexity people call simple rules. Those are the, right, we better stop. We can talk about this over lunch if you want to, or at a separate time. But the simple rules that bees use when they interact with one another are what makes those interactions work. So when you actually meet together and when you have conversations, what do you talk about? And how do you do that? And it's about dialogue, it's about dialectic, which is an enormous subject, which actually you could contribute to brilliantly, I would have thought. And you could make a really powerful contribution to how to make what complexity people call simple rules. It's a set of values. It's a sense of modelling what matters. It's all very complicated, but you know this stuff and I don't need to tell you, but it's putting it in this context, it can become a key to making things better. And something that you can offer that maybe you didn't realise you could offer. Okay. And I put a bit stuff about, that text says more or less that really. So, did I want to say something at the end? We've run out of time. There's stuff about how to evaluate this, which is quite tricky. Oh, I was going to say the Israelis and the Palestinians, a brilliant example of finding an opportunity to bring warring parties together is the Divan East-West Orchestra that Daniel Barenboim started. Now, if he can do that and succeed, then I think any of us can succeed at what really are lesser problems than the one they've got. So I'll leave you with that. It's that I'm talking about, finding those opportunities. And it means that you have to, when you're talking to someone, you have to go with their agenda, which is of course what you do, isn't it, in work. It's no good talking to your clients about what you care about, it's what they care about. It's exactly the same. That's what bees do. Okay, that's it. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
7 minutes over. So 8 minutes.
Shall we have lunch and continue the discussion over lunch for those of you who want to, and then we can also see if there's a want or will to have something else after lunch.